Anna Brennan had been waiting for her train under the scorching Texas sun, her pregnant body weary and weak from 2 days without food. At just 23, she looked much older, her once beautiful dress now worn, bruises on her wrists a silent story of the abuse she had endured. As the whistle of the train echoed, her vision blurred, and she collapsed right there on the platform. By some miracle, Daniel Dalton, a rugged cowboy with a haunted past, was standing nearby. He rushed to her side, catching her before she hit the ground. The station master yelled at him, "Train's leaving. You taking her?" Without a second thought, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He carried her in his strong arms, ignoring the train, taking her instead to the safety of his ranch. 5 miles away, the rough journey felt endless, but Daniel kept moving, knowing he had to get her to help. She was unconscious, and every now and then, he could feel the baby kicking softly against his arm, reminding him of the life she was carrying. His mind flashed back to the pain of losing his wife, Elena, in childbirth 2 years ago. He rode harder, pushing back the old grief, trying to focus on the woman in his arms. When they finally reached his small cabin, he called for Mrs. Chun, his elderly Chinese neighbor, to help. Together, they laid Anna on a bed, her face pale, and examined her carefully. The bruises spoke of a life filled with violence, and the designer clothes with the monogram AB were a stark contrast to her battered appearance. Hidden in her carpet bag, they found a pistol, and Daniel realized she wasn't just running from physical abuse. She was running from something much darker. Mrs. Chun, with her wise, steady hands, checked on Anna, sensing the imminent birth of the child. "Baby coming soon. Maybe too soon," she said gravely. Daniel stayed by Anna's side, worried, and in the quiet moments when she muttered in her sleep, he heard words that made his blood run cold. "Don't let him find me. The documents. He'll kill us both." For 3 long days, Anna drifted in and out of feverish delirium. Daniel cared for her, tending to his ranch when he could, but always returning to watch over her. It wasn't until the morning of the 4th day, when her eyes fluttered open, that everything changed. She was confused, her eyes filled with terror, and her first question was, "Where am I?" Daniel gave her water, a little broth, and quietly said, "You're safe now. You're going to tell me everything." Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Anna Brennan." Daniel froze. The name hit him like a blow. Brennan? His father's killer's family. The family that had stolen everything from everything his father fought and died for. The moment stretched, the weight of history pressing on him, as Anna's next words shattered whatever hope he'd had of a simple life. "That's right," she whispered. "And the child I'm carrying is the heir to everything his family stole from yours. But if he finds me before this baby is born, neither of us will survive." The air between them grew thick with fear and uncertainty. And as Daniel looked down at the woman who now carried the child of his family's greatest enemy, he knew that the battle for revenge had only just begun. Daniel sat on the edge of the worn chair, the weight of the world settling heavily on his shoulders. Anna had just whispered her name, Anna Brennan, and the moment it left her lips, his heart sank. He had heard that name many times in his life, but never like this. Brennan wasn't just a name, it was the name of the man who had destroyed his family. Victor Brennan, the very man who, with the help of corrupt officials, had forged documents to steal his family's 5,000-acre ranch. Daniel's father, a strong and proud man, had fought tooth and nail to hold on to the land, but in the end, the courts were rigged, and he died trying to protect what was left. Daniel's mother had passed soon after from the heartbreak of losing it all, leaving him with nothing but memories and a deep-seated need for revenge. And now, here was Anna, Victor's wife, carrying his son, the child who would inherit everything his family had lost. Brennan? Victor Brennan's wife? Daniel's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. Anela's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her voice trembling as she spoke. Yes, I'm his wife, and I know what they did to you. I have the proof, Daniel. I have everything. She reached into the carpet bag, her hands shaking as she pulled out the stack of documents. Evidence of Victor's crimes, forgeries, bribery, and even murder. Anela had known from the moment she had married Victor that something was wrong. But it wasn't until a few weeks ago, when she had stumbled upon these papers in his study, that she realized the full extent of his treachery. I was just a girl when I married him, Anela whispered, looking down at the ground as she spoke. I was orphaned at 16 and had no choice. At 18, I thought I was marrying someone who could provide for me. But he's a monster, Daniel. A cold, ruthless man. I didn't know the truth until it was too late. He's been lying to me, hiding his crimes, but I found the documents. I overheard him talking to his lawyer about having me killed after I gave birth. He said that once the child was born, they'd arrange an accident, something that would look like childbirth complications. The baby was all he needed. Daniel's stomach twisted in disgust. He had always known Victor Brennan was a greedy, selfish man, but this was far worse than he had imagined. Anela continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't stay. I couldn't let him do that to me, to our child. So, I took what I could, these documents, and ran. Her eyes met his, pleading for understanding. I came here because I have no one else, Daniel. I've been running from him for weeks, and if he finds me, if he finds these papers, he'll kill us both. A chill ran through Daniel as he processed everything she had said. His mind was racing. His father's death, his mother's grief, and now the woman carrying the child of the man responsible for it all. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something far deeper: revenge, justice, and reclaiming what had been stolen from his family. You want me to help you survive this birth, Daniel said, his voice cold as he tried to focus. You want me to keep you hidden until the baby comes. And in exchange, you'll give me these documents, the proof that Victor Brennan stole everything from my family? Anela nodded, her hands clutching the papers tightly. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I'll give you everything. The documents, the testimony, the legal standing to challenge everything he took. It's yours. You can fight him. I'll sign whatever papers you need. But I need you to help me first. Help me survive this birth. Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. For a moment, all he could think about was Elena, his late wife, and how he had promised her that he would never mourn forever, that he would find a way to move on, to live, to love again. But now, with Anela, the woman who carried the child of his enemy, it felt like history was repeating itself. Yet, there was something about her, something in her eyes, that reminded him of Elena. The same desperate, fierce love that any mother would have for her child. The same determination to protect, to survive. It was that love, that drive that made Daniel pause. He didn't have to do this. He didn't have to help her, help the woman who had married the man responsible for his father's death. But something in him, something deep and buried, told him he had to. Anela had no one left. She was alone, scared, and she wasn't asking for anything but his help. And the child? Daniel asked, his voice low. What about the child? Anela's eyes hardened, and she lifted her chin in defiance. The child gets nothing from Victor. No inheritance. I'll sign papers to make sure of that. The child will have nothing to do with him. I swear it. The baby will be free, Daniel. Free of him, free of the sins of their family. Her words rang in Daniel's ears, and for a moment, he felt the weight of her promise. It was a sacrifice, one he couldn't take lightly. His family had been torn apart by Victor's lies, and now, here was Anela, offering to give up everything she could for the sake of her child. But what about Daniel's vengeance? What about the land? What about the justice he had been seeking for so long? Daniel clenched his fists. You don't owe me that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't need your promises. I don't need the land, Anela. What I need is you safe. And I need you to trust me. Trust that I'll protect you and your child, even if it costs me everything." A long silence passed between them. Outside, the wind howled, the sky darkening with the threat of storm. Mrs. Chun, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "The baby's coming in 2 or 3 weeks. She needs rest, peace. Revenge comes later. You must keep her safe until then." Daniel nodded, the resolve settling in his chest. He wasn't doing this for revenge, not yet. He was doing it for Anila, for the baby, for Elena. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Stay till the baby comes. After that, we'll see what happens." But even as he said it, Daniel knew things would never be the same again. The past, the pain, the loss, it was all coming to a head. And with Anila, with her child, he would finally have a chance to make things right. But first, they had to survive. First, they had to get through the birth. And then they would fight, as one or as enemies. He didn't know yet, but he would find out. They all would. Sheriff rides up asking about strangers in the area. Daniel lies. "Just me and Mrs. Chun." After Sheriff leaves, Daniel turns to Anila, jaw tight. They're getting closer. "Victor's offering reward money. Someone will talk. We need to move you somewhere safer." As the days passed, Daniel felt the urgency of their situation growing. The quiet life he had once known was slipping further away with each passing moment, replaced by the constant tension of hiding Anila and her unborn child. Mrs. Chun, with her wisdom and experience, had suggested a hideout, a place they could retreat to until the baby was born and Anila was strong enough to move again. The old Spanish mission ruins, located 10 miles north, were the perfect place. Abandoned for decades, the mission was out of sight and well hidden from anyone who might be searching. Daniel rigged up the wagon with blankets and pillows to make the journey more comfortable for Anila, and they set out before dawn, moving swiftly and quietly. Anila, whose strength had been sapped by days of fever and fear, was too weak to protest. She lay on the wagon bed, trying to stay calm despite the storm of emotions swirling in her heart. The journey was rough, the roads uneven, but Daniel kept her steady with his presence, riding beside her, constantly reassuring her with a calmness he didn't entirely feel. Along the way, Anila's contractions began, small, sharp pains that came and went, a sign that the baby wasn't far off. The sight of her clutching the side of the wagon in pain, her face pale with fear, made Daniel's stomach twist. His own heart raced, knowing that every minute they spent on the road made them more vulnerable. But there was no turning back now. They had to reach the mission. As they neared their destination, Anila's pain seemed to intensify. She squeezed her eyes shut, clenching her fists against the jolting motion of the wagon. "Just a little longer," Daniel urged, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel his own anxiety rising. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at the mission ruins. The place was as desolate and silent as Daniel had remembered. It was the perfect hiding spot, an old chapel with a sturdy roof and broken stained glass windows, surrounded by high stone walls that had long since crumbled. They set up camp inside the chapel, and Daniel immediately began to gather firewood, his mind racing with the reality of what they were up against. The next few days were a blur of activity. Anila, though exhausted and still weak, insisted on helping. Despite her body's protests, she tried to clean the chapel, moving the debris and setting up a small, makeshift bed. Her hands shook as she tried to prepare food, burning bread and ruining coffee. But Daniel was patient with her, guiding her gently, showing her how to knead the dough and pour the coffee without spilling. For the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw a flicker of a smile on Anila's face, genuine and unguarded. It made his heart ache with a mix of sympathy and something else, something he wasn't quite ready to name. At night, after the work was done, they would sit on the cracked pews and stare at the fading light through the stained glass windows, watching as the colors shifted and danced in the shadows. Daniel would talk about his life, his ranch, and the things he'd lost. Anila would listen, her eyes filled with something that resembled understanding, though she never said much. It was as if they were both too raw, too broken, to speak of everything they had endured. Instead, they let the silence between them speak for itself. But as the days passed, the tension between them began to shift. They both started to open up in ways that were subtle but significant. Anila would laugh at Daniel's jokes, and Daniel would look at her not with pity, but with something more complicated, a quiet admiration. He found himself helping her more, teaching her the little things she had never learned. How to make fire from nothing, how to mend clothes, how to take care of herself without depending on anyone. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. Something deeper was happening between them. One evening, as they sat together, Anila's swollen belly resting heavily on her lap, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. "What would you do with the land, Daniel, if you got it back? The ranch, what would you do?" Daniel paused for a long moment, surprised by the question. His mind flashed to his family's land, the land he had lost, the land that had been stolen. He had imagined taking it back, destroying Victor's hold on it, punishing the man who had taken everything from him. But in that moment, sitting beside Anila, he realized that it wasn't just about revenge anymore. "I built something good," he said slowly. "Something for people who need a safe place. A home for those who've lost theirs, just like you." Anila's eyes softened, a gentle smile touching her lips. "That's beautiful," she whispered. It was a moment of clarity for Daniel. He didn't just want to take back what had been stolen. He wanted to build something better. And for the first time in a long while, he felt hope, a flicker of something that wasn't born of pain or vengeance, but of the possibility of a future. The next evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the mission's broken windows, and the thunder rattled the walls. Anila, already on edge from the stress of hiding and the constant threat of Victor's men, began to panic. She had always been afraid of storms, especially after the years of abuse at Victor's hands. The thought of being trapped in a storm with no way out terrified her. As the wind picked up, her breathing became shallow and her chest tightened. "I can't breathe, Daniel. I can't breathe," she gasped, clutching her chest as if she were drowning. Daniel, who had been outside securing the roof, rushed inside, soaked from the rain. He immediately went to her side, kneeling beside her and taking her hands in his. "You're safe. You're with me. He can't reach you here, Anila. You're safe." His voice was low, steady, his presence a rock in the storm's fury. Anila clung to him, shaking violently. "Why are you doing this?" she asked between sobs. "Why are you helping me? You should hate me." Daniel's heart ached as he held her, his own emotions rising. He had hated her once, hated her for being the wife of the man who had destroyed everything he held dear. But now, as he looked at her, he saw not the enemy's wife, but a woman who had suffered more than anyone should. "I did," he admitted softly, his voice cracking. "For about 5 minutes, I hated you. But then I saw you. I saw you as a person. I saw the fear, the love, the strength. And I realized something. What you did, what you're doing now, it's not about him anymore. It's about you and your baby. It's about what you're willing to do to protect him." Anila looked up at him, her tear-streaked face reflecting the storm outside. "I'm falling in love with you, Daniel. I know I have no right to, but I can't help it." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "I'm falling in love with you too, Anila. I've been falling for a long time, but I didn't know it until now. And I'm not going to run from it." She stared at him for a moment, as if weighing his words, and then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, "I'm afraid. I'm afraid of everything, of what's coming, of what will happen if Victor finds us." Daniel held her tighter, his voice firm. "We'll get through this, Anila, together. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The storm outside raged on, but inside the mission, there was a quiet warmth between them. They were no longer just two people hiding from past. They were two people building a future. And as the wind howled and the thunder crashed, Daniel held her close, knowing that the greatest fight was still ahead. The baby was coming. and so was Victor, and they would face it all together. Morning after the storm, Mrs. Chin gallops up on horseback, urgent and breathless. Victor's men in town, offering $500 reward, and they know about the mission. Someone remembered it. They're coming, maybe tomorrow, maybe today. The days after Mrs. Chin's warning passed in a blur of anxious preparation. Daniel could feel the tension growing, the weight of what was coming pressing down on him more with each passing hour. The storm had shaken them both, but there was no time for fear now. Anila's labor was nearing, and Victor's men were getting closer. The mission was no longer safe enough, but there was nowhere else to run. Mrs. Chun, who had been a constant support, insisted that Anila couldn't move again. Not now. "The baby's coming," she said matter-of-factly as she set the room up for the birth. "She needs to stay calm, Daniel. Moving her would only make it worse." Daniel paced the small chapel, his nerves eating away at him. He had no idea how he would keep them safe when Victor's men were so close. Mrs. Chun worked calmly, setting up clean cloths, boiling water, and preparing the room as Anila lay on the makeshift bed they had made from blankets. Her contractions had started coming in strong waves, each one leaving her breathless and trembling. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around the room as if searching for something to anchor her. Daniel wanted to be strong for her, but inside, he was a mess. He was terrified of failing her, terrified that they might not make it out of this. The distant sound of hooves, the calls of the men searching for them, made his stomach tighten. He had loaded the rifle and placed it by the door, ready for whatever came next. But for now, there was only the birth. There was only Anila. She grabbed his hand hard as another contraction hit, and her breath came in ragged gasps. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice strained. "Don't leave me." Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, nodded. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." He wiped the sweat from her brow, his hand shaking as he held hers. Outside, the storm was worsening, the wind howling through the ruins and rattling the windows. Anila's body shook with each painful contraction, and Daniel could hear her moaning in pain. It felt like time had stopped, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what was coming. The pain was only getting worse, and Daniel could see the fear in Anila's eyes. He wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't know what to say. He didn't know if there was anything he could do to take the pain away. But he was there, holding her hand, telling her she was safe, telling her she could do this. That was all he could give. He felt the cold weight of the rifle against his leg and knew that if it came to it, he would fight to the death to protect her. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all a blur, but through it all, Anila kept her focus on him. And as the night wore on, as the contractions grew stronger and more intense, Daniel's thoughts wandered to what they would do when the baby was born. Would they be able to escape before Victor's men found them? Would Anila survive this? Would they even have a chance to be happy, to live a life free from the shadow of Victor's cruelty? And then, in the midst of all the fear and the chaos, there was a new sound. The sound of Anila's scream as she pushed with all her might, the baby coming at last. "Push, Anila. Just one more time." Mrs. Chin's voice was steady, calm, like everything was going according to plan, but Daniel's heart raced in his chest. The pain in Anila's voice was almost unbearable, and he could feel his own chest tightening as he tried to comfort her, try to keep her focused. "You can do this, Anila. You're strong. You're stronger than you know," he whispered. But there was no time for more words, only the desperate push toward the end. The baby's head was finally visible, and with one last, final push, Anila screamed. And then, in an instant, the room was filled with the sound of a newborn's cry. Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The baby had arrived. Mrs. Chin worked quickly, cleaning the baby, cutting the cord, and wrapping him in a clean cloth. The room was filled with the sound of the baby's cries, loud and strong. Anila's body relaxed, exhaustion flooding through her as she sank back into the blankets. Daniel stood there, motionless, his heart racing as he looked down at the tiny, perfect life in Mrs. Chen's arms. The child was healthy, his small chest rising and falling as he breathed, his fists clenched, his eyes still sealed shut. Daniel's heart swelled with emotion, his throat tight as he looked at Angela. She was breathing heavily, her eyes closed, a small smile on her face as she looked down at her baby. "It's a boy," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with a tenderness that Daniel hadn't heard from her before. "He's perfect, Daniel." He felt something shift inside him in that moment. The anger, the grief, the rage that had driven him for so long. It all seemed to melt away in the presence of this tiny child, the child of his enemy, but also the child of a mother who had sacrificed everything for him. "He's perfect," Daniel echoed, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't know what the future held, or what would happen when Victor finally found them. But in that moment, all that mattered was the baby, the tiny life they had fought so hard to protect. They had done it. They had survived. But the battle wasn't over. The storm outside was still raging, and Victor's men were getting closer. And yet, as Daniel stood there, holding Angela's hand as she cradled their son, he couldn't help but feel that for the first time in a long while, they were exactly where they needed to be. Together. Safe. And no matter what happened next, they would fight for this moment, for this family, until the very end. But outside, the storm raged on. The danger was far from over. And as they settled in for the night, the sound of hooves and the voices of Victor's men in the distance filled the air, drawing closer with every passing second. Daniel knew that they couldn't stay here much longer. They had to move, and fast. Victor's men start piling brush against the chapel walls, the smell of kerosene filling the air. "You're not getting in here," Daniel shouts. 6 weeks had passed since the night Angela had given birth, and while the storm outside had subsided, the calm inside was anything but. Their small, hidden life in the mission ruins had been upended by the arrival of the federal marshal, sent by Mrs. Chen's son, who had quietly ensured the right people were informed about Victor's crimes. The marshal had assured Angela and Daniel that Victor's reign of terror was nearing its end, but there was no way to know for sure until the trial. Now, Angela stood at the edge of the courthouse, holding baby Dalton in her arms as she prepared to face the man who had stolen everything from her and from Daniel. The courthouse, though small, was filled with the murmurs of the crowd, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all whispering behind her back as she walked in, her head held high. She could feel the weight of their eyes, could hear the snide remarks and the pitying looks, but she ignored them. This wasn't about them. This was about justice. This was about her son, her future, and taking back what had been stolen from her and Daniel. As she entered the courtroom, her gaze fell on Victor, sitting smugly in the defendant's chair. His icy stare met hers, and she didn't flinch. He was trying to maintain his composure, but she could see the hint of panic in his eyes. He knew that his empire was crumbling. He knew that the evidence was irrefutable. The trial began with the prosecutor presenting the documents. Every forged deed, every bribe paid, every murder committed. They were all there, laid out in black and white, undeniable proof of the crimes Victor had committed to gain power and wealth. Angela sat quietly, holding Dalton, her eyes never leaving Victor. She listened as the prosecutor recounted how Daniel's father had fought to keep the family ranch, how he had died in the struggle, and how Angela had uncovered the truth about her husband's evil deeds. She felt a bitter satisfaction as Victor's lawyer tried in vain to discredit her. "Mrs. Brennan is an unreliable witness," the lawyer argued. "She abandoned her husband. She is living in sin with another man. Her testimony is biased, and her claims are without merit." Angela could hear the venom in his voice, and she couldn't help but feel a flash of anger. But she stayed calm. She stayed strong. The prosecutor turned to her, asking her to testify. With a steady breath, Angela stood, clutching baby Dalton in her arms. The room fell silent, the weight of her presence filling the air. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt the nervous energy buzzing in her chest. She knew this was her chance to make Victor pay for everything he had done. I was married to Victor Brennan for 4 years, she began, her voice clear and firm. I witnessed him conduct illegal business. I saw him lie, cheat, and steal. I overheard him ordering violence, and I know that he would have killed me if I hadn't run. But I had proof. I found the documents. I overheard him talking to his lawyer about arranging an accident for me after I gave birth. He wanted me dead, and he wanted my baby. I left because I knew if I stayed, he would have killed us both. A hush fell over the courtroom. The gasps from the crowd were deafening, and Daniel's heart raced as he watched Anila, his eyes filled with admiration for her bravery. She continued, her words steady and sure. I took those documents. I took the proof of everything he's done. And I ran. I did what I had to do to survive, to protect my baby. And now, I'm here telling the truth. I'm here to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Victor's lawyer was quick to interject. This is pure fantasy. Mrs. Brennan is nothing but a scorned woman trying to destroy my client's reputation. Where's the proof? Where is the evidence that she isn't lying? Anila stood tall. The documents speak for themselves, she said, her voice unwavering. And I have more than just the papers. I have this. She reached in her coat and pulled out the small journal she had found in Victor's study, the journal that detailed every crime, every bribe, every stolen acre, all written in Victor's own hand. She placed the journal on the stand. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor handed the journal to the judge. Victor's face turned pale as the judge began reading through the entries. The damning evidence was undeniable. The judge looked up from the journal and fixed his gaze on Victor, his voice stern. Mr. Brennan, your defense is weak, and your actions are unforgivable. The evidence is clear. You're guilty of fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and accessory to murder. This court finds you guilty as charged. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Some cheered, others sat in stunned silence. But Anila could only focus on the man in the defendant's chair, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. Victor struggled to maintain his composure as the bailiff moved to handcuff him. You destroyed my life. Victor spat at Anila as he was pulled away. That child should be mine. You'll pay for this, Brennan. You'll pay. His words hung in the air like a curse, but Anila wasn't afraid. She was free. She had won. As Victor was dragged out of the courtroom, Anila felt a sense of relief wash over her. The long road to justice had finally led to this moment. Daniel stood by her side, his hand on her shoulder, and together they walked out of the courtroom as a family. Finally whole, finally free. The judge banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. Victor Brennan, you are sentenced to 25 years of hard labor, the judge said, his voice steady. All properties obtained through fraudulent means will be returned to their rightful owners. Anila's heart swelled with emotion. She had done it. She had taken back everything that had been stolen from her and her son. But the victory didn't feel as sweet as she had imagined. As Victor was led away in chains, Anila couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The trial was over, but the journey wasn't. She still had to rebuild her life. She still had to face what came next. Outside, as she and Daniel walked toward the fresh air, she could feel the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. But there was still so much to do. The battle had been won, but there were other battles to fight. As they made their way to the waiting carriage, a lawyer approached, holding a thick stack of papers. Mrs. Brennan, he said, his tone formal, we'll need to begin the divorce proceedings. Victor Brennan is in no position to continue your marriage. Anila looked at Daniel, her heart racing. The lawyer's words hung in the air, but she knew what she had to do. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. She was free, but there was still one thing left to do. Start the paperwork, she said softly. I want it finalized as quickly as possible. Daniel's eyes searched hers, and she could see the question in his gaze. But she didn't need to explain. She knew what she wanted now, what she had wanted all along. She wanted a future with him. She wanted to be free, to live a life without fear. And she wanted him by her side, because, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, I want to marry someone else, if they'll have me. Daniel stood still for a moment, processing her words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. He took her hand, pulling her gently toward him. I think I'm the one who should be asking you that, he said softly. So, what do you say, Anela? Will you marry me? The words came so easily, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Anela smiled through her tears. Yes, she whispered, her voice full of conviction. Yes, 1,000 times yes. A voice called from behind them, and they turned to see a familiar face, a sheriff, smiling broadly, waving a piece of paper in his hand. Well, looks like you got some new papers to sign, Mrs. Dalton. It had been nearly 3 months since the trial, and as autumn arrived, the world around Daniel and Annalise seemed to be changing for the better. The land that had been stolen from Daniel's family had been returned to him, the 5,000 acres now restored to their rightful owner. The ranch was thriving once again, the past sins of Victor Brennan slowly being erased with each plow of the soil, each brick laid in the construction of the new house Daniel had promised to build. But it wasn't just about the land or the house anymore. It was about starting fresh, about creating a life free from the shadows of the past. Anela and Daniel had settled into the foreman's cottage on the property, a small but cozy place with a front porch that overlooked the open fields. It was modest, but it was theirs, and for Anela, it was everything she had ever wanted. The baby, now a healthy and happy 3-month-old boy, had brought a sense of peace and purpose to their lives. Anela had spent every day with him, nursing him, watching him grow, and learning how to care for him in ways she never had before. The memory of the mission ruins where she had given birth seemed like a distant, forgotten nightmare now. In its place was a new home, a new life, and a new family. Daniel would come home from the ranch at the end of every long day, his clothes dusty from the hard work, but always with a smile on his face. They were building something together, brick by brick, with every sunrise bringing them closer to a future they had only dreamed of. Anela had become skilled at cooking, baking bread without burning it, and making meals that didn't just fill the belly, but warmed the heart. She laughed as she set the table, Dalton squirming in her arms as she tried to get him to sit still. Daniel would come in from the fields, his boots heavy with the dust of the day, and take his place at the table, his eyes filled with a quiet joy. He's getting stronger, Daniel would say, his voice full of pride as he looked at their son. Held his head up all by himself today. Anela would smile, her heart swelling with love. Like his father, she'd tease, her voice light. Daniel would blush, a rare sight for anyone who knew him, and shake his head. Not yet, he'd say, his voice low but full of affection. But he's getting there. As much as they had both moved on from their past, the ghosts of it still lingered. Every now and then, Anela would catch herself staring out at the fields, her thoughts drifting back to the moment she had collapsed on the train platform, when she had been nothing more than a scared woman running for her life. But that was before Daniel had caught her, before they had started building this life. She had a family now, and she was finally free of the man who had tried to control her, to own her. She was free to live, to love, and to raise her child. And she knew she was safe, because Daniel was with her. But even with all the peace that had settled over them, the world still had a way of throwing surprises their way. One crisp morning, as Anela sat on the porch with baby Dalton in her arms, she watched Daniel work on the new house. His strong hands moved expertly, hammering the frame into place, his every action a testament to the life they were building. She had never seen him so focused, so determined. He paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow, and looked up at her with a smile that made her heart flutter. He was everything she had ever needed, As she watched him, her hand instinctively went to her belly, feeling the small bump that had begun to show. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but she knew she was pregnant again. The thought filled her with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. A second child, another chance to build a family, another life to love and protect. But with that excitement came the familiar fear, the fear of losing this life, of losing the future they had worked so hard to create. She had seen the darkness that could consume their world, had felt the sting of betrayal and loss. But now, with Daniel by her side, she knew they would face whatever came together. They had already survived so much, nothing could tear them apart now. Later that evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Daniel came inside, his arms tired from the day's work. Anila was sitting at the small table, a plate of food set out for him, and she couldn't help but smile as she watched him. He had changed so much since that first night when he had carried her to safety. He wasn't just the cowboy who had saved her. He was the man who had rebuilt her life, who had shown her what it meant to have a real family. As he sat down, she met his gaze, her eyes filled with love. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, feeling her heart race in her chest. "I'm pregnant again," she whispered, her voice trembling. His expression softened, and a smile spread across his face. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice low and full of joy. Anila nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, I'm sure." He stood up, his hand reaching for hers, and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You've made me the happiest man in the world, Anila," he whispered into her hair. "You've given me a family, a future, and now we're going to have another one." For a moment, they just stood there, holding each other as the world outside seemed to fade away. There was no past, no pain, no fear, just the two of them building a life together. The baby kicked gently against Anila's side, and she smiled, knowing that this child, like Dalton, would be born into a world of love and safety. She felt Daniel's hand on her belly, his touch gentle and protective. This time, he said softly, "No fear. Only joy. Only joy," she agreed, her voice full of certainty. And in that moment, Anila knew that no matter what the future held, she and Daniel would face it together. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with each other, they could survive anything. As the night settled around them, Anila and Daniel sat together, hand in hand, watching their future unfold. They were no longer just two people who had survived a series of misfortunes. They were a family, strong, united, and ready for whatever came next. And as they sat there, the last rays of sunlight fading into the horizon, they knew that this was only the beginning. They had fought for this life, and now they would build it together, step by step, day by day. And when they looked back on this moment, they would know that it had all been worth it. For they had found something greater than revenge, greater than loss. They had found love, and that was the greatest victory of all. 1 year later, the family stood at the same train platform where Anila had collapsed all those months ago, ready to embark on a new journey. The train's whistle sounded in the distance, and Anila, now visibly pregnant with her second child, smiled as she held baby Dalton in her arms. Daniel stood beside her, his hand on her back, guiding her through the crowd. "You okay?" he asked, looking down at her with a concerned expression. "More than okay," she said, her voice full of contentment. "I'm remembering. This is where it all started, Daniel." She pointed to the platform where she had fallen. "This is where you caught me, where we started our family." Daniel smiled, squeezing her hand. "And where we're going together." As they stood there, looking ahead to the future, Anila knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. Together. Forever.